Earlier this month, we started to explore creative poetry activity options for National Poetry Month and any old time, but there were just too many to pack into one episode. I promised you a part two, so this week, let's continue our creative poetry fun together. If you've always felt a surge of irritation when you flip your planner to the next week and realize a poetry unit is on the horizon, I believe these two episodes can really help. So let's dive in. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers looking for more. More creativity, more engagement, more joy, and no more scripted curriculum, lesson planning ruts, or boring book lists. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm honored you're trusting me to help. You're not alone on this creative journey anymore. So my first activity for you today in this new set is to try a multimodal poetry collage. I think this can be a really fun way to give students a lot of choice over what they're reading to help them start to explore modern poetry and think about what they like in a poem. They may have only read poems that they were assigned in class so far in their lives, and this activity gives them a chance to branch out, read a bunch of poetry, see what appeals to them, see what styles, what topics, what feels of poetry are interesting to them. So here's how it goes. Of course, feel free to adapt it in any way you choose, but the way that I have done it is to give students access to the Poetry 180 collection. This is a really cool digital collection curated by a previous poet laureate, Billy Collins, and he put together 180 different poems that he thought were great for the classroom. So that's cool, right? And you have this digital anthology ready to go for your students, or you could use any curated collection or anthology that you want them to explore. The goal as they start digging around, reading bits and pieces, reading whole poems, is for them to find lines that they like, hopefully beginning to feel some connection to some of these poets and poems as they choose and skip and dive into the ones that they feel connected to. Ask them to write down some lines, the lines they like the best. It could be 4, it could be 6, it could be 10, however many you wish. And make note of where those lines come from. So they're going to write down a favorite line, a poet's name, a poet's poem name. Then, after a period of exploration, again, flexible to what you want, maybe it's 10 minutes, maybe it's the whole period, they're going to take those lines they've gathered and collage them together, adding images around them to help bind them. This is something I like to do in Canva. You could easily do it on slides. You could also do it on paper. You could collage with magazines and glue and scissors, old school, or you could let students draw or paint around the lines that they've written as they recombine them in new ways. Once they've created some kind of collage in which the colors and images combine with the lines in a certain order that works for them, it's time for them to reflect a little bit and explain what they've created. They should also have some kind of sources cited. So they're going to have this bright, interesting collage of favorite lines. They're going to cite the sources, and then you're probably going to want to wrap it up with a gallery walk so they can see each other's and maybe start to get interested in some of each other's new favorite poets as well. Okay, next up, try experimenting with poetry one-pagers. A lot of people use one-pagers for novels, which is fabulous. I'm super much a fan of that, but I think they also work very well with poems. And if you want your students to read one specific poem very deeply, a poetry one-pager makes a short and potent alternative to an essay on that poem. You can accomplish a lot of analysis depending on what you ask students to put in that one-pager, and you can also push them to connect the poem to other works, to the world, to their lives, whatever you want. I think it's easiest with a one-pager usually, especially for students who are nervous around this form, to give them a template. So what I like to do is give them a piece of paper that's divided up into sections in some way and say, hey, put your favorite images in the top left corner, or the literary devices that you notice, or the themes that you notice, or, connect this poem to another poem in the top right corner, in the bottom. give a review of the poem, like showcase what you like about it and what you don't, and whether you'd recommend it to somebody. And throughout all of this, use words and images to explore your thinking. This can look a lot of different ways. This can be a big summative assessment, or it can be like a fun activity along the way. But you can accomplish a lot with a one-pager, and sometimes it can just feel a little less intimidating, and it can definitely be less time-consuming than doing a full paper on a single poem. All right, next let's turn to creative poetry workshops. So this is one of my favorite go-tos. It's called the I Am From poem. You've probably heard about it. There's a reason. It's a really great workshop to do with students. So the original poem is by George Ella Lyon, and she writes all about her heritage, where she's from in terms of like sensory imagery from her childhood, the people that she was connected to, the places, the sayings, like all these different vivid details that she weaves together with I am from X and Y, I'm from Z and A, I'm from B with a bit of C. Like she just weaves it together, and it's very easy to imitate, which can be a great jumping off point for students who are maybe a little wary of poetry. This kind of poem, this imitative poem, as Mark Dressman calls it in his book, Let's Poem, has a lot of potential to help students feel more comfortable as they write poems. Mark Dressman talks about it in terms of having students try to write blues poems modeled on the blues genre. My friend Amanda Cardenas from Mud and Ink Teaching has talked about having kids write their own honest poems modeled after Rudy Francisco's My Honest Poem. One year, a visiting writer came into my classroom to help students imitate Wallace Stevens' 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, which turned out to be absolutely fabulous as a springboard. It turns out there are a lot of things that you can look at from 13 different angles, and it's pretty fun to try out some of Stevens's moves. So this doesn't have to be limited to I Am From poems. If you have a favorite poem or a favorite type of poetry, you can do this kind of formatted, slightly templated springboard kind of activity with lots of different poems. But I Am From poems are a really great option. Okay, next up, let's talk a little bit about a poetry activity that helps students dive deep into any poem, and that is collaborative annotation. I think all too often annotation becomes a marathon highlighting session or a post-it frenzy. Kids just don't totally love or understand annotation, so they find one go-to and they just lean on it, right? Okay, annotation means highlighting. I'm just gonna highlight every other sentence. That's not what we're looking for, of course. And so this is just one way to help them see some of the different options and see how their classmates are annotating, and hopefully pick up more skills in the actual annotation world, as well as understand a poem more deeply. So here's how I'd suggest you do it. Print big versions of a poem or of different poems to tack up on your wall. You're going to need enough for student groups. So I'd suggest student groups of 4. It could be 3, it could be 5. And you just want to make these poems big enough that all the kids in the group can be writing on them on the wall at the same time. Then inside the groups, have students divide up roles. And again, you can make these roles what you want, but here are some suggestions. Every role is going to work on something different on this big poetry poster. Maybe one person is going to illuminate some of the imagery. So they're going to create sketches and sketch notes all around the margins and through the poem to help highlight meaning and draw the viewer's attention to these striking images. Maybe another person in the group is going to search out craft moves, literary devices, and label them and highlight them or color code them. One person might find tricky words and define them on Post-its that they stick on and track the rhyme scheme and think about structure. You get the idea. Whatever you're working on, you can tailor roles to suit what you want students to become more noticing of, what you want them to annotate when they're on their own. All the kids in the group can be working on the poem at the same time, and then when time is up, they can take a step back and they can look at what they've created, and they're going to see all these rich elements from the group. The poem is going to have become this canvas of deeper thinking. You can let them present back to each other, sort of walk each other through what they did. If everyone in the class was doing the same poem at that point, you can do a gallery walk, see what everyone else did. Again, they're learning more and more about the poem that they've just annotated with so much depth, but they're also learning strategies for annotation, which is a really valuable thing for any student. If students all worked on different poems, this could be a great chance for groups to share with groups, or some few minutes of presenting back to the whole class. Maybe a group would read their poem out loud and then draw attention to a few of their favorite annotations. Okay, next up, performance poetry. I don't think I say it enough, but the 20 plus poetry slams that I held in my classes were some of the most wonderful experiences of teaching for me. And I think for my students too. I was really reminded of it this week as I was hearing from a teacher in the Lighthouse who was talking about this amazing poetry event that she had at her school, and it just brought back so many happy memories. And so I wanted to be sure to include today this idea of doing some kind of poetry slam or poetry jam or open mic or special poetry night. You can call it what you want. You can make it competitive or non-competitive. The point is to have students up there reading their work or reciting, performing, orating their work. A poetry performance event just combines so much of what can help kids engage. It's going to revolve around looking at contemporary texts that feel relevant along the way as mentors. It gives them so much agency over what that event is going to be like, over what they're going to write and perform. It gives them an authentic audience for their work. It gives them room for creativity. It's a wonderful thing. For me, in my classes, every slam was completely different because I divided up the class every single time into classroom committees that were in charge of the judging, the programs, the ambiance, pretty much every aspect of the slam. I would check in with them for sure. I would make sure things were coming together. I would offer to help as needed. But basically, the students put on these events. And I think there was way more buy-in because of that, right? They invited the guests. They invited the guest judges. They made the programs. They ordered the burritos. They, figured out what location on campus they wanted to use and went and decorated it if they were decorating, or put little flowers on the tables or whatever they were going to do. It was always a big surprise for me. It was always really special. And I would just arrive and I would applaud and I would sit in the back and use a really simple rubric onto which I was trying to pour as much positive feedback as I possibly could for each student, because they were taking such an emotional risk in standing up to read in front of their peers. And for me, these events they were so special and so memorable. And in all the times that I did it across 2 different countries and many groups of students, it never failed to be really a highlight of the year. So I really think if you're planning a poetry unit, making the anchor of it an eventual event can be just so motivating and special, because then everything else you do, all the studying of any type of poems, all the judging and discussion of performance poems, all the workshops, it can all feel like it's pouring into this eventual event. The more they understand poetry, the more they understand the techniques, the more poems they write and edit and improve, the better their final performance will be. And so everything feels like it has a purpose, and that makes a big difference when you're learning. Okay, my friend, we are coming to the end of this part 2 of creative poetry activities. And I want to say that if you have listened to the first part and the second part and you're still like, I want more fun, creative poetry ideas, I want to point you over to my friend Melissa Alter-Smith's website called Teach Living Poets. She has a whole bunch more amazing, wonderful, contemporary poetry activities, and I have enjoyed collaborating with her. I loved having her as a guest on the podcast in the past, and she's been a guest expert in the Lighthouse a couple of different times, working with me on curriculum, and we've had so much fun designing things together. And so that would be a good next step if you're feeling like you're raring to go and you want more. All right, my friend. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about even more creative poetry activities. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.